Skill trees are one of my favorite mechanics in games. I love the anticipation and payoff of getting powerful abilities, and the process of shaping a character to my own playstyle creates such a satisfying feeling. And that's why I think it's such a shame that skill trees have developed a reputation as a boring and overused mechanic. But how do we get there? Are skill trees just outdated as a mechanic? Today I'll be doing a deep dive on skill trees, starting with how it's defined and what it's used for. Then we'll look at some great versus underwhelming examples to explore some alternatives, ending with practical design tips. Welcome, my name is Alan and I'm a game designer working on my own tactics RPG. On this channel, I analyze mechanics and games in detail to figure out what makes them fun. Enjoy! To understand why skill trees are so popular in modern gaming, we should take a brief look at where it came from and what its features are. Its origin is not conclusive, but there are two angles to look at it. If you go by the first notable appearance, then it originated from the 1980s Civilization board game as the form of a tech tree. Players start off at the first tier of research with limited options, unlocking more as they progress. The new tech branches off from its prerequisite, giving that iconic skill tree aesthetic. Other strategy board games followed this design, but it was enjoyed mostly within its niche, with limited impact on the gaming scene in general. Which leads to the game that really brought skill trees into the mainstream, Diablo 2. In this action RPG, character learns skills by investing skill points into different spellbooks. Its design has many features that you still see to this day, like limited skill points, active and passive skills on the tree, and spell categories or thematic specializations. This type of skill tree would go on to be one of the most iconic gaming mechanics in RPG genre, and later become a widely used mechanic in all types of games, including third-person shooters, tabletop RPGs, MOBAs, and many more. So how can this mechanic work in so many games? Despite its countless iterations, the skill tree can actually be simplified down to two defining features. First, its skills are organized in tiers or levels, so players can see ahead and plan accordingly. Even for games that reveal bits of the tree at once, they usually still show the immediate tier above. This is different from a class system where power-ups could be hidden until you level up or even random. Second, skill trees must begin at a common starting point or a trunk, with more selections branching off it. Additional skills have to be unlocked sequentially, which just means that the previous skill has to be unlocked first. This is different from a feats list where perks can be unlocked in any order. These two elements make up the skill tree. It's a flexible system that can be used for almost any game. Why would you use it for just about any game though? I believe it has everything to do with the fundamental purpose of the skill tree and all the benefits you reap from designing one well. At its core, the skill tree is a progression system. These are used in games to keep players engaged by satisfying a fundamental human desire to achieve growth and mastery. Other common progression systems are classes, feats, crafting, story-related upgrades, and many more. Each system has their own pros and cons, and a game would often include multiple progression systems at once. Depending on each game, there might be overlapping features between progression systems that are ultimately designed for the same goals. So how do you make the best out of skill trees? For me, skill trees are at its best when it leans into these aspects of a progression system. The first one is building anticipation by showing upcoming skills that are exciting. This is the biggest separation between a skill tree and a typical class-based system. With skill trees, you can immediately see some cool upgrades, get excited, and chase after them. When you level up in a class-based system in JRPGs, your stats might automatically go up randomly, and sometimes you'll even learn new skills too, which is great for a sudden spike in excitement and immediate feedback. But if you want to plan ahead as a first-time player, then you need to pull up a wiki or look at external info, which kind of defeats the purpose of that system. In that scenario, a skill tree would be better if you want to encourage planning and build anticipation. Some skill trees combine the both and hide the parts of the tree until you get closer. How much you want to show depends entirely on how hard you want to lean into shorter bursts of excitement versus long-term anticipation. When games nail down the planning aspect of skill trees, I often find myself thinking about builds and future upgrades when I'm at work or just doing chores. A big part of the fun for a game is just thinking about it too. The second thing I want skill trees to focus on is enabling player creativity by having flexible lateral options. Don't get me wrong, a well-balanced linear skill tree can serve as a decent progression system, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but ultimately you're still going from point A to B with slightly different paths. Skill trees designed with a more lateral or horizontal consideration will have the option for players to go down one branch, go sideways and grab some other nodes, mix and match abilities, and create something unique to their playthrough. When skill trees are not super linear with clear-cut destinations, it makes me excited to experiment, and I get to play out my character as opposed to an archetype. Aside from being a progression system, skill trees also offer many convenient ways for designers to present gameplay. The layered structure of a skill tree is a natural way to introduce complex mechanics into your game. Rather than overwhelming a player with tons of combos and systems at once, it makes more sense to allow the player to discover them at their own pace. This can work as a double-edged sword though, and getting it wrong can backfire in many ways. More on that later. Lastly, well-designed skill trees naturally become a big point of discussion for any game. Players will form communities to talk about best builds, unique combos, off-meta builds, and so on, giving designers another reason to try to work in a skill tree. It's clear now that a skill tree is a powerful, flexible system that can be used in many ways, so it's really no wonder that the popularity of skill trees started growing so fast. For a designer, the temptation is simply too great. But you can only get away with so much, and without innovation or improvement, there comes a time when players start to notice a trend and the novelty wears off. Nowadays, it seems like a skill tree is just something you see in every game but don't really care about. There's a distinct fatigue I notice, both from developers and from players. It's hard to know exactly what went wrong, but we can take a look at the most common complaints about skill trees and try to see why they feel that way. From my research, keywords that came up the most are things like low impact, lazy, unnecessary, grindy, content padding, and boring. Instead of addressing each of these points one by one and looking at where it came from, I managed to group them into categories, since I noticed that these complaints really just stem from a failure to implement the strengths of a skill tree. But real quick, as a disclaimer, these examples I'm using are great games that I've enjoyed too. The point is not to bash these games, but to use them to improve our own designs and understand why people voice these complaints. I'm by no means trying to imply that I'm a better designer or that the game is bad and you should feel bad for enjoying them. Anyways, the first category of complaints all point to a general lack of excitement. The options are boring, and players don't even stop to read the abilities and just pick the first upgrade that looks alright. This is most apparent in action RPGs, usually when the options you're given are either basic percentage increases or abilities that don't really alter gameplay in any way. It's hard to get excited about a skill when you know they're just stepping stones to a stronger version, or because they're triggered so rarely that you don't even notice them. The combat tree for Witcher 3 is the weakest for this reason. Most upgrades are simple percentage increases, and these are just not that fun in action games. You also have a few new attacks, but it's hard to justify using them when light attack spamming works just as well. The other skill trees are much better by comparison. The Signs tree, when specialized, allows the player to play as a caster with low cooldowns, and the Apex abilities are transformative too, giving it a distinct identity. The Alchemy tree is even better in my opinion. It has unique abilities centered around a Witcher's identity of being prepared. This tree encourages the player to try other systems like crafting potions and using oils, which also serve to improve the overall role-playing experience of the game. It's crazy to say, but action is what matters in action RPGs. Skill trees should focus on unlocking impactful abilities that's about doing. I would have liked to see the combat in Witcher 3 do that by leaning into different schools of the Witchers and their unique fighting styles. For example, speccing into School of the Cat unlocks more fast attack combos, and speccing into School of the Bear unlocks different strong attack finishers. Something like that would bring it closer to the other trees in my opinion. Another category of complaints centers around this overall feeling of bloat and the illusion of choice. It feels as if you're being gatekept from fun abilities when skill trees converge to a single capstone ability that's super powerful. Ironically, a system that's supposed to favor customization ends up becoming linear, as players will rush towards the capstone ability. At this point, an actual linear class-based system would be better. It's also hard to balance this as a designer. If you make your encounters around the fact that players will rush towards a capstone ability, you end up punishing players that experiment with other parts of the tree first. On the other hand, if you balance for players that don't specialize, the ones that do will blitz through your encounters. This problem is made even more apparent if you put crucial mechanics in the skill tree. In Sekiro, the Mikiri counter is a skill that allows you to parry thrust attacks. These attacks can't be parried by default, and lots of enemies use them, making Mikiri counters a core part of combat. There are more examples of skills like that in Sekiro to a lesser degree, and if you look up build guides, you'll find people saying that there are a handful of must-get skills that you need to play the game properly, while the other ones can be easily ignored. If your progression system sounds like that, a better way might be to place these essential upgrades in key parts of the game story, like a reward for defeating a main boss, and put the less important skills as unlockables in optional areas. This way, as a designer, you can know for sure how to balance encounters, and you also encourage players to explore when they're stuck, rather than to grind for more skill points. I know a lot of these might sound nitpicky, but these are the things that can really frustrate some players and give skill trees a bad impression. A lot of times, it's not the mechanic that's at fault, but rather its implementation. Ultimately, these skill tree examples don't appeal to the fundamental strengths of the system. And a big part of good game design is knowing what tools to use for the right context, rather than using something just because players are expecting it. Now, I want to break down 3 popular games which not only play to the strengths of skill trees beautifully, but they also each add something unique to the equation. The 3 games I want to showcase are God of War Ragnarok, Monster Hunter World, and Path of Exile. I picked skill trees that each do something very well in their own way. First, let's look at God of War Ragnarok. I remember my first impression of this tree to be somewhat unimpressed, since it has that typical modern action RPG layout. You know, the multiple small, vertically run skill trees. But I was actually quite surprised at how effective everything was. What Ragnarok's design really excelled at was not only having cool action-based skills, but also getting you to try them. Almost every node on the tree is a new type of attack or a powerful effect. Unlocking new skills feel impactful and immediately changes how your gameplay feels. Once you unlock these skills, you can add mods to them by earning skill XP whenever you use them in combat. Here's an in-game example. Glacial Rake is a skill I used in my playthrough where I spec'd heavily into elemental attacks. It's a medium-ranged crowd control ability, and I went with the momentum mod, which makes it easier for me to activate Permafrost, another passive skill that triggers only when I fight enemies without getting hit. And when Permafrost is active, I get to use a strong finisher move. So this combo creates a completely new and engaging way for me to fight, and it's just one example, but it's a night and day difference compared to how many action RPGs, including the previous God of War title, can pretty much be completed by only using light attacks. The skill tree also reveals itself in sections as you progress the main story to find upgrades for your weapon, making it a great system for onboarding players with more complex combos, while allowing the designers to balance encounters smoothly. All in all, I think the skill tree in Ragnarok is just a very clean and effective skill tree for action RPGs. It doesn't try to do anything too crazy, but rather just does everything extremely effectively, which is almost the complete opposite approach for the next skill tree I want to talk about. And of course, it wouldn't be a skill tree video if I hadn't mentioned Path of Exile. The first thing everybody sees about this skill tree is just how massive it is. It can be a turnoff to quite a lot of new players, but for players that like to experiment and make builds, they're going to be all over this. The good thing about this skill tree doesn't just come from its size though. Simply having a giant skill tree isn't good enough. Path of Exile's skill tree is really the amalgamation of 7 class trees stitched together. You have the 3 traditional archetypes, melee, ranged, and spellcasters on opposite ends, and then you have the hybrid classes in between them. At the center, you have a unique class whose identity is based around being a flexible multi-class character, kind of like multi-classing in D&D, and the character you pick determines which location on the tree you start at. The small nodes on the tree are essentially all just stat modifiers too, making your actual options even more obvious. For example, if you wanted to play a straightforward axe-based melee build, you can't really go wrong by just highlighting and grabbing all the axe nodes on the tree, along with some life nodes. The other weapon nodes aren't really being considered at all. All this to say, it's really not that bad if you just want to beat the campaign for the first time, and you're not trying to min-max every last bit of power you can get from the tree. And what makes this skill tree really special for build makers are the keystones on the tree and how accessible they are. Almost every single keystone will completely alter the way your build functions. A single keystone either enables your build or completely bricks it. For example, there's a keystone called Chaos Inoculation. This keystone makes you immune to chaos damage at the cost of setting your life to 1. So to use this keystone effectively, you need to prioritize energy shield instead of life as your HP, otherwise you'll die in one hit. The lateral emphasis of the skill tree plus build defining keystone means that a lot of powerful builds are actually planned around the keystones, with the small nodes along the way just being stat modifiers that players lean into to round out their build. This makes Path of Exile one of the best games for realizing your creativity and making interesting builds. Figuring out how to weave mechanics together to create builds is one of the most fun things about this game. This last skill tree almost didn't make it because I almost didn't realize it was a skill tree, and I'm so glad I made this connection because I think it's really cool how they implemented it. So in Monster Hunter, unlike traditional action RPGs, your character doesn't level up to unlock new skills. Rather, your in-game power progression is tied to your equipment. Characters are able to switch between any of the weapons freely between quests. This makes it extremely important for you to stay on top of your gearing by crafting upgrades frequently. And the crafting system in Monster Hunter is actually done as a skill tree. You start off with a base weapon, and the initial upgrades are done with easy to obtain materials. And as you hunt monsters, you get their parts like scales and claws to use for crafting. The starting weapons branches off into different specialized weapons based on the monster you hunt, and you get to preview the upcoming upgrades too, exactly like a skill tree. These branches have different properties based on the monsters. For weapons, it can be elemental, sharpness, and affinity, and for armor, it's skills and stats, with these properties mimicking the traits of the monster. For example, Rathalos, an aggressive flying fire wyvern, gives you access to fire elemental weapons, and the armor set boosts your attack, fire damage, and jump attacks. The individual armor pieces don't require prerequisites, and you can't really build them on top of each other, so they're not really a skill tree compared to the weapons, but I think that's for the best, as you can mix and match the pieces easier to make interesting builds. This mixed progression system between a skill tree and crafting combines perfectly to get the best of both worlds. You get the anticipation and sense of progression from weapon trees, and you also get some natural world building and cool visual designs from the crafting aspects. It's definitely a unique hybrid that might be overlooked when you're thinking broadly about skill trees. God of War Ragnarok, Path of Exile, and Monster Hunter each have their own unique take on skill trees that works super well for the type of gameplay they offer. When you design systems and mechanics, it's often a better approach to build it from the ground up based on your game, rather than to have an end product in mind already. So now I want to share my own bottom-up process that I use to design a skill tree for my game, and explain some pitfalls you might run into. So for some quick context, my game Secrets of Shadows is a tactics RPG in a Japanese fantasy setting. The main selling point and focus of my gameplay is character customization and exploring lesser known Japanese fantasy archetypes. Which means I'll be building on top of some of the more known stuff like samurai, shinobi, and hunters, alongside more experimental classes like spirit tuners, puppeteers, and engineers. This leads to the first step of my design process, which is to figure out which progression system fits with my goal. It's kind of funny, but prior to all this research into skill trees, I kind of just thought that it would be cool to have a skill tree on top of a traditional class-based system. But that turned out to be a pretty bad idea for two reasons. One, both systems have a lot of overlap, and trying to develop both at the same time just made them weaker and confusing. Two, it wasn't realistic with the amount of resources I have. Whenever you stack systems like this together, it exponentially increases the amount of design and playtesting you have to do. And I simply don't have the time or the skill to do that. So I decided to go with a shared skill tree system similar to Path of Exile, where each class starts at one location but are free to path to any direction. This way I only have one tree to worry about, and I still get to lean into different class archetypes. Next, we should think about how this skill tree will function with other systems. For my game, there are two main considerations: gearing and combat. Combat in my tactics RPG is completely turn-based, and you only control one unit at a time to do one action. It's similar to how a turn in Fire Emblem works. The gearing is also straightforward, with armor pieces providing stat modifiers and passive effects. I want combat to be made exciting from individual units using impactful spells, rather than combat be reliant on stats and simple attacks. This means my skill tree should be based heavily around spells, or have impactful passive effects based around different archetypes. Now we're on step 3, we should figure out the size of the tree and the relative power gain from each individual node. I know a massive one like Path of Exile is out of the question since I'm just one guy working on this, but I also don't want a super small tree. So having a small tree based around skills might result in players being stuck with one spell for a long time, with each upgrade adding too much power at once. It's also harder to bring out character customization if you have very few points to spend on a small tree. I ended up deciding on 4 tiers of skills per starting class area, with 2 to 3 nodes between them. This gives me around 30 to 50 nodes I have to worry about, and if about a third of them are passives, that gives me 20 to 30 spells to work with. A max level unit will have maybe 5 to 6 spells from the skill tree, which all seems manageable and in line with what I want to do. I can always adjust this number in the future, but having a rough ballpark calculated based on the number of tiers and nodes can give me a pretty good picture on whether or not I over or under scoped my tree. Step 4, and this is a fun one, is the aesthetics and layout of a skill tree. I personally think having a clean vertical tree is a bit boring, and I always appreciate when nodes are at least arranged to fit a theme of the game. Since my game is inspired by Japanese and Eastern aesthetics, I thought shaping my skill tree into a yin and yang shape is fitting, and I also have 3 classes that deal physical damage and 3 classes that deal magic damage, so I thought the symmetry here was neat. The aesthetics and layout of a skill tree isn't just for looks too. Having this in mind when you're designing can actually bring out some unexpected ideas as you're trying to make sure everything fits a theme. Obviously, if your skill tree is more straightforward, you might not be able to do this, but get creative and have fun with it. The final step is just to playtest and figure out what works and what doesn't. There is a 0% chance you're going to have a balanced skill tree on your first try, so the more you playtest, the better the end result will be. I won't get into playtesting much since that's beyond the scope of this video, but this is more of a reminder that the first version of your tree will be jank, and you shouldn't really feel bad if everything falls apart in an early playthrough. Lastly, I want to leave you with 3 random tips just because I couldn't fit them anywhere else in this video, but I thought they were still important. So 1, make sure the player can reset their points, but just don't make it free or too easy, or the player might be compelled to respec before each encounter, and nobody wants to do that. 2, have very accurate descriptions. It's very frustrating when you spend points on a skill, but it works differently than what you had imagined. 3, think about uncommon verbs as a starting point for a skill. If you can turn an uncommon verb into an action, chances are it's more interesting and impactful than something common like attacking or dodging. There are so many unexplored mechanics and layouts for skill trees out there just waiting to be made. I think the way skill trees are currently implemented in games can be a bit boring or misunderstood at times, but I'm still excited whenever I see one in game as it'll always be one of my favorite mechanics. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'm making a new video every 2 weeks, and the next one will be about level design and environmental storytelling. That's it, and check out Secrets of Shadows on Steam if you want to, and let me know in the comments what your favorite skill tree is. Bye!